programs in voice and piano, our Liederabend series, and now this newly launched Song Lab have been and continue to be profoundly shaped by his example and inspired by his tireless efforts as a champion of song. For every lover of art song across the globe, Graham Johnson surely sits atop every list of favorite performers, most prolific and influential writers, most inventive programmers, and most faithful servants to this repertoire. Whether one considers the areas of German Lieder, French Mélodie, or English language art song, among others, his work, spanning several decades now as scholar and performer, is simply incomparable. As we in the Song Lab turn our attention this month to the songs of Benjamin Britten, we could be in no better hands than Graham Johnson's, hands that were so closely connected to Britten himself. His recordings of Britten's works with some of the world's greatest singers and his published writings on Britten form the essential core that we all study as we aim to draw closer to Britten's works and to his poets. So we thank you, Graham, for spending the next couple of hours with us and for returning to us despite the ocean between us today.
Thank you so much, Cameron. That's a most gracious and wonderful introduction. Not all of it deserved, but I've long learned by visits to North America that politeness is something that we British people could learn from Americans. And actually, Benjamin Britten is a very controversial figure in some ways. He may not seem to be, but he's controversial in the sense that, in a way, he was a complicated man, writing music immediately accessible to most lovers of 20th century music. This was denigrated towards the end of his life, and particularly in the 70s and 80s, when avant-garde music, the Boulet's world, the world of Stockhausen, seemed to be in the permanent ascendant. He himself, because I saw him a few months before he died, was very pessimistic about his music surviving in this ever-evolving modernity. But as it's turned out, his songwriting has now become a classic part of the canon, respected and loved all over the world, as indeed are his operas. And the controversy remains in private matters, the fact that he was a difficult man, that he was a prickly man, the fact that he was very demanding. There are lots of stories afoot about Britten's cruelty, for example, to some of the people he worked with, not physical cruelty, but a sort of exacting demand that they should do exactly as he said, although actually, if the truth be told, if one was to go into the annals of Robert Schumann, or more particularly Wagner and Hugo Wolf and Debussy, you would find that great composers are always extremely exacting. They've got a limited amount of time, as certainly Britten did. He died at the age of 63. They've got a lot to get done. And at the height of his career, Britten was writing an opera a year almost. 1945, Peter Grimes, 1946, The Rape of Lucretia, 1947, Albert Herring. You know, that rate of productivity can only occur with a workaholic, with a person of enormous spiraled up energy. He was a thin man, a wiry man, apart from a heart condition that was fatal in the end. He was actually fit and athletic and loved sport. And his music is similarly fit and wiry. There's not a lot of fat on it. There's little sentimentality. It goes directly to the question, and it's got a clarity and a sound world that's all its own. The achievement of that sound world is all the more remarkable because he was born into a country where there was a very different musical aesthetic in his childhood. He was born in 1913, thus never experienced personally the horrors of the First World War. But the country as a whole, after 1918, recoiled from European influences and from the influences of the German language. Many leader people began doing songs in English simply because in the audience were people who'd lost their children to the Germans and had no appetite for listening to the German language. So the world of English song, the world of Vaughan Williams and Frank Bridge and John Ireland and Peter Warlock, this was the world of song into which Britten was born. But for various reasons, because he wasn't part of that generation, because he listened avidly to European broadcasts and heard a lot of music from Europe, because he never felt absolutely in the pathway of the normal, of the ordinary or the accepted, or certainly the patriotic, anti-violence, almost from the beginning, a pacifist by nature. Someone gay, although it took him some time to accept that fact about himself, who was not going to fit into the comfortable and smug imperialist illusions of a crumbling British Empire. Here was a person who was prepared to look back to Henry Purcell and the extravagant word setting of the 17th century. Here was a person who was prepared to set European texts. Now, the great woman composer of the Edwardian era, Maud Valerie White, whose songs I absolutely adore, she had lived in a world where Germany and France and Britain were practically joined in a common market of understanding. It was unbelievable how those conditions that we in Britain until recently enjoyed of being part of Europe were taken for granted before that terrible conflict of the First World War, which separated everybody. But what actually happened in Britain's youth was that English music became a carapace. There were marvelous things within it. And the developing Vaughan Williams and Warlock and the songs of John Ireland still remain in terms of the outside world, even in America, an underestimated treasure of that period. Britain was lucky enough as a boy to study with Frank Bridge, and when he went to the Royal College of Music, he studied with John Ireland. But he was never of their number. For one thing, he was regarded as too clever by half. He was a person who didn't hide the fact that he was bored, always bored by people who couldn't do things quickly and deftly. He could compose any number of fugues. He had a stunning technical quiver in his arm. I mean, his armory of technique was amazing from an early age. And he began to look at texts in French when he composed a set of songs with orchestra for his parents' wedding anniversary. It was to sets of French poetry. It was quatre chansons françaises. Now, he also, in returning from America in 1940-41, had set for Peter Pears a set of Michelangelo sonnets. In the 50s, he set Friedrich Hölderlin. In the 60s, he set Pushkin. All this stylization, this awareness of European culture is to be heard in an early orchestral piece of his, Variations on a Theme of Frank Bridge, where we get an uncanny awareness of all sorts of styles that he'd somehow absorbed. And I say again, from going to a lot of concerts as a young man, but also from listening to radio broadcasts. And he literally created his own aesthetical world. The florid style of writing may have had something to do with Purcell, but this was so different from the folk song inspired rigors where you were only supposed to set one word per syllable that we get in a lot of English song, that are said to be English because of its links to folk melody, researched by Vaughan Williams and Percy Grainger and lots of other people. And also, of course, there was a sense of not going, deliberately defying Schoenberg and Berg and all those people, and Stravinsky. They, of course, their music was heard in Queen's Hall concerts, and Britain, as a young man, heard it. But It was all nothing to do with what people thought was right and proper for an English person. And when the time came for him to write his songs, one finds that he had an array of influences, of course, the songs of his contemporaries, but also an awareness of Schubert Lieder and how Schubert had put his songs together. And he had absolutely no shame at all in being eclectic, in taking something from the tradition into which he was born, going back into the 17th century to look at Purcell, looking at what the Germans had done with Lieder in terms of the integration of accompaniment and voice, and then coming up with something that in his finest and more mature works is something utterly original. There are phases in Britten's musical development, but I would remind you of an astonishing fact. There are very few composers whose works on the opera stage have held the stage as easily as their songs with piano. Schubert wrote, as we know, songs like no other person in history, but his operas have never established themselves on the stage. Schumann wrote one opera that was scarcely performed, ditto Hugo Wolf. One very seldom hears Del Corregidor. Brahms never wrote an opera. Maybe the person who comes to mind best is Richard Strauss, although the aesthetic of Strauss and Britten are very far apart. Which is to say, operas that stand the test of time and songs that stand the test of time. And each of those composers being an important accompanist of their own songs, with a partner who was the earliest and most authentic propagator of those songs, in Strauss's case, his wife, Pauline de Ahna, and in the case of Benjamin Britten, the extraordinary lifelong relationship with the tenor Peter Pears, for whom most of his songs, not all, but most of his songs were written, and for whom almost all of his operas were conceived with Pears in a central role. And the final thing to say is that Pears was one of the various literary influences on Britten's life. I became a close friend and marveled at Pears's remarkable knowledge of literature, his feeling for poetry, his understanding of Shakespeare. For example, it was he who fashioned the Midsummer Night's Dream, Britten's opera, into the composable shorter version that we know so well in Britten's setting. And of course, Auden was a great advisor. People like Edward Sackville West, people like William Plumer, Mathamby Piper, the great librettists with whom Britten worked. But I would also say that Britten was a quick composer, very instinctive, and that sometimes his readings of poems and their prosody are not ideal. Dare one criticize such a great genius as Britten? Well, I'm second to none in my admiration for his genius. But there are prosody difficulties and errors in Les Illuminations in terms of the French, and in some of the more obscure English settings, and we'll hear one today, in fact, there are difficulties of prosody, that rushing ahead and knowing the setting simply as something to be composed with quick brilliance is perhaps quite a different thing from the quiet and expert steeping himself in poetry that we find in Gerald Finzi's reactions to Thomas Hardy, for example. So Britten had it all. He had the genius, the quickness, the instinctive response to words and the illustration of words that can scarcely be equaled by any composer in English other than Purcell, and by any other composer of song other than someone like Schubert, where there is the tonal analog brilliance of taking a verbal phrase and finding a musical equivalent for it, apparently without difficulty. It takes the breath away when Britten, not only in his songs, but in many of his operas, finds musical translations or equivalents of verbal ideas. And as such, when we come to his songs, we are realizing that it's the opera composer at work. It's the same composer at work. And when we come to the first cycle that we're going to embark on any minute, which is the Winter Words, there is a composer who's just had a huge success with Billy Budd, the Herman Melville. It became increasingly successful through the years until now it's a standard part of the repertoire. It's a composer who is in the process of writing Gloriana for the Queen's coronation. And it's a composer who's had world successes behind him on the bigger scale of opera. So that coming down to write something in miniature on 3 pages, and it's by no means the same thing, and it's by no means the same kind of talent. We sense the use of drama, and we sense pictures, we sense a mise en scène, we sense a production very often. We sense an experienced person, and in terms of the stage. And in terms of this, I would say only Mozart can be comparable. He didn't write many songs, but in the songs that he did write, like the song about Luisa, als Luisa die Briefe ihres ungetreuen Liebhabers verbrannte, she throws the letters into the fire of her untrue lover, and on 2 pages is summoned up an incredibly economical dramatic schema. Britten is capable of the same thing. Let's begin then. We're not being chronological today. We're going to begin with the song cycle, Winter Words, to texts of Thomas Hardy. And we are going to invite Sam Rosner and Marie-Elise Boyer to perform, and there are 2 songs. We'll do them one at a time. So I'll hear the first song and comment, and then we'll do the second song. And the first song is At Day Close in November, which is the opening song in the Britten cycle. So sorry, I'm a little bit later than I would have liked to be because I had to untick various technological buttons. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
You can hear me now?
Yes, loud and
I can hear you, but I can't see you anymore.
How about now?
That's better. Yes, that's better. Yes, an excellent performance. I know I've heard both of you on several occasions perform before. An observation is, don't forget that the poem dates from 1914. It's just about the time of the First World War. So Hardy is already 74 years old. And he's got this incredible sense of looking back, probably out of the window of Max Gate being the house that he bought in Dorchester, which is still a national museum, where he became, as he grew older, increasingly reclusive, living with memories of his first wife, who had died, Emma, and whom he regretted very, very much around this time, only realizing what she had been to him after she had died. And indeed, so reclusive that the Prince of Wales, later Edward VIII, came to Max Gate and was permitted to have tea with Hardy, who became, at that period, a total national treasure, with a state funeral at Westminster Abbey for his death. I mean, one cannot underestimate the importance of Hardy, the controversial novelist in his middle 40s, everybody against him for writing Jude the Obscure. And then suddenly turning to poetry in 1896, and for the last 32 years of his life, writing 8 volumes of poetry and no longer any novels. And these poems impinging on the consciousness of people in a style that was entirely his own, which earned the respect of every single living person. I mean, he's one of those people that Auden admires and Larkin admires and Tom Gunn admires. I mean, Cecil Day-Lewis admires, everybody admires Hardy. Hardy is a national monument. And I want to share with you that I've got 2 signatures on the wall of my music room. I've got a large letter from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, signed by him. And underneath, and I've taken it on the wall to show you, underneath, I have a portrait of Thomas Hardy with his signature, because I regard Goethe and Hardy as the 2 great old men of literature and poetry. Hardy's genius as a poet is extraordinary in the sense that he writes like nobody else, takes a vocabulary from ordinary Dorset beginnings, working class, uses words in a way that nobody from Oxford would ever begin to use them, a sort of eccentricity. And eventually, just by the sheer depth of his humanity, despite the fact that he is by nature a huge pessimist, we get a glimpse of that pessimism in this poem. There is a sense of such wisdom, such depth, such understanding. And Hardy is on my bedside table. He's one of those people who can dip into the big volume of collected poems and come up with something wise. In that respect, I think maybe the equivalent is Robert Frost in America, in the sense of that grand old man from the country, used to country ways and understanding country ways better than city life, and having that ability to actually, in a few words. And so we have here somebody who's bought an estate, who's planted trees, who see them grow up. In his June time, that means as a young man. And now in November, they are surrounded by children who just accept the landscape as it is and don't realize that landscapes can easily change. The trees can be chopped down, that trees can be lost, that people can take possession of places and bulldoze and put bypasses and roads. And the sense of conservation. And it doesn't say very much, there are Hardy poems that are much more ambitious in terms of what they want to say. By the way, did you know that I'm holding up the first edition here of Satires of Circumstance, which is the volume which this poem first appears. And it says, the 10 hours light is abating and a late bird flies across.
Oh.
And Hardy later changes it as the editions go to wings. And just that one word change gives a lift to the line. And the final line, that none will in time be seen, was originally a time when none will be seen. So he tightens up that. Britten was no collector of first editions, by the way. He wasn't a sentimentalist about books and poets. They were unbelievable grist to the mill. He was an impetuous composer, dazzlingly impetuous. And part of that impetuous quality is in direct contrast to anything in this vein and from these books that Gerald Finzi writes. You've probably performed Finzi as well, have you? There are lots of tenor songs by Finzi and lots of baritone songs. Indeed, in this book, Satires of Circumstance, the poem that comes just before, it's called Before and After Summer, which is another setting around this point in this book, Under the Waterfall. That's a most wonderful baritone song setting by Finzi. In terms of your performance, which is excellent, take the long view of a man, an older man looking out of the window, rather than a young man full of excitement.
Sure.
It's that type of patrician Abstand, as they say in German, where Peter appears, I've experienced so much, and now they're children, and this is the house, and you were there down on ground level, seeing things, which is natural because you are a young man. Never any touch of sentimentality. Marie-Elise, be certain in those closing bars that you counted absolutely, dat, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, boom. Don't actually go down, boom. Because that Mozartian simplicity of counting is very, very important to Britten. I think you've got to play it like Schubert or Mozart, not like Brahms, who was the big bugbear because he represented Victorian amplitude, the rose on the bosom in a Liederabend, Die Nachtigall, which in the case of Berg, he parodies that type of Liederabend. It's clean as a whistle. But there are inflections, and there were 1 or 2 inflections that I would like to mention. When he chose the title Winter Words for this cycle, it was, in a sense, because he was becoming to terms with Winterreise as a cycle. Winterreise had become his obsession. Winter Words is simply the 8th volume of Hardy poetry in the lineup that starts with Wessex poems and goes to Winter Words with Satires of Circumstance, Moments of Vision, Time's Laughing Stocks. Each of these volumes has a different title. Winter Words is the last title, and they by no means contain all these poems. He chooses these poems from the whole range of Hardy's output. So it seems to me it's got something to do with Winterreise, also because of the D minor of the song. And that's the opening key of Gute Nacht of Winterreise. Have you sung Winterreise?
I've sung a few movements, Gute Nacht being one of them. I love
Yeah. You remember in Gute Nacht, the final verse changes with an inflection from D minor to D major.
Like this song, yeah.
When F minor changes to and he does that here on the inflection and the children. The ache there of I wish I had children and didn't have them in my life, perhaps more Britten-esque than Hardy-esque. Hardy was childless. Britten was clearly childless, although children were important in his life. And the children who ramble through here conceive that there never has been, and then a time of, I don't know, when no trees, what time was it? What time when no trees were here? Was it that time that we are talking about, that nescience that we come across in the final song, Before Life and After? But there's something very magical about where no trees, and we actually for the first time have a D major. So like Schubert, when there are tiny inflections of rubato, it's to do with underlining key changes of emotional significance.
Absolutely.
So when no trees, no tall trees, that's that actual moment there. The tempo was good. Britten's tempo markings in terms of metronome markings are never to be taken all that seriously. He hated them. He didn't really want to provide them for his printed works. When you say, I set every tree in by June time, from there to the end of the song, it's a question of an older man looking over a life where he has created something and where he is due. At any time, he actually lived 14 years beyond. He died in 1928, the Schubert centenary year of death. But there is an element of patrician. Peter Pears, the quality of his singing, even when emotional, was never what I call a puppy dog enthusiasm. It's abating. And imagine yourself contemplating a scene out of a window. And there's a certain height that gives you. It's not right there among the trees. It's on the first floor of his working study or his bedroom on Max Gate. That's all I can say, because obviously, the challenges of the song, it's brilliantly played, except for that no sentimentality, except on the bar line with magical changes. That's when it's acceptable. And that's exactly also when it's acceptable in Schubert. I think it's lovely what you do. The challenge is to keep the bottom register of the voice spinning and resonant. Peter Pears had an extraordinary voice. It's actually bedeviled all sorts of tenors. The high floated E's in Let the Great Bear and Pleiades and Peter Grimes, which someone like Vickers had to sing forte just because there wasn't a float for him on an E, and there's not a float for many tenors on an E, right in the passaggio. But he also had a baritonal part to his voice, so that those D's can sound rather low for some tenors. That's where Tony Rolfe Johnson was a Great Britain singer, because he also had a sort of a baritonal quality. The pianist must be extremely aware of when the voice goes low. There's nothing particularly shameful about that. It's just to be aware that voices are built different ways. I'd very much like to hear the second song now, please.
Sure, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Beautiful playing and lovely singing. A few observations. Do you know what the Great Western is?
Yes, it's a train that goes, isn't it from Britain to the, I'm sorry, I forgot the exact route, but it's a late night train that travels across the UK.
It's a train that goes from Paddington, so you can think bears, right? It's a train that travels from Paddington into the West Country, and particularly to places like Bristol, Bath, Somerset. In those days, there were separate train companies which were amalgamated into British Rail eventually, and then with Mrs. Thatcher split up again into private ownership. So each, it's one of the great debates about how strikingly ineffective financially and in every other way that splitting up has been. But this would have been in one of those trips when maybe Hardy was visiting as a young draftsman from London to go and see his fiancée, or the woman he was courting, Emma, in Bristol. And it's an incredible, if you think of it, he's also in third class. He's a young man. He can't sit up in first class, otherwise he wouldn't see the boy. But I've always thought how now you would be talking to the boy. You would say, are you all right? Where's your mother? What are you doing? Are you here all alone? Call the guard. Call, get the police. What's this boy doing with a box at this time of night on the train on his own? But this is Victorian. This is Edwardian. This is a picture where you don't meddle in other people's affairs, but you actually have the thoughts go through your head. What could this child be doing? And the child is so angelic looking that you think, well, God knows what he's doing here, or God knows what he's doing here. Maybe he's an angel. Maybe he's going to be Britten, who was so concerned all his life with the plight of children, right from that poor apprentice boy killed in Peter Grimes, right through to the Children's Crusade of Bertolt Brecht that he said towards the end of his life. Children, and he did a whole opera about the cruelty of chimney sweeps, and let's make an opera. So in a sense, it's the sense of still contemplation. Again, it's a very good performance and it's beautifully played and sung, but you could actually get the whole thing more as if you were contemplating something and it's going through your head. It's a little bit too active. And in the middle section, I would say that whole recitative, what past can be yours, O journeying boy. I don't know whether you did it instinctively, but it's a good example of Britten's mistaken setting. What past can be yours, O journeying boy. In the sentence, it's the use of a gerund, O boy journeying towards a world unknown. If you make a complete new sentence of towards a world unknown who calmly as if incurious quiet, it makes no sense.
Right.
Got no subject. So what past can be yours, O journeying boy towards a world unknown. O boy journeying, O journeying boy. It's a poetic thing. And thank you for not hanging around a great amount of time between those phrases. You elided them, which was absolutely right. But as if incurious, quite on all at stake. I'm not sure I like that breath just before alone. I think it shows that the whole of the section was getting a bit stuck. You could move it on a bit more for the sake of the breath so you didn't have to breathe.
Sure.
Calm. Oh, by the way, you gave us a very nice past. If you gave us a class rather than class,
Sure.
it would also be more believably Britain circa 1890. Although class would be fine if you were from the north. But Hardy would not have said class, I don't think. And here we're going to get a debate on Wessex and West Country accents. But I mean, you didn't say past. What past class? Can undertake this plunge alone. And then, of course, knows your soul is fear, journeying boy, our rule drums far above. This is, you did that well. In a sense, that the greater, I don't think I'm hearing you in this particular situation as well or as fully in terms of how the voices might, as if I was in the hall with you. but it can be effulgent. I mean, that change to the C major of Journeying Boy is one of these great triumphant changes from minor to major that occurs in song. As if he is the victor, that this is not something to be sad for. Maybe he's fully in control of the situation. Maybe there's nothing to bemoan anything. With spacious vision you mark and meet this region of sin that you find you in, but are not of. And thereof and above strangely rhyme. Knows your solar sphere, O journeying boy, our rude realms far above. Again, Britten could have said that slightly, knows your soul a sphere, our journeying boy, our rude realms far above, is how I would read it. But he sets it, knows your soul, O journeying boy, our rude realms far above, whence with space. It's very, very good exercise, always, and we'll come to this in John Donne, which we're going to hear in a minute, to read the poem and to realize that sometimes in the interest of musical interests or whatever, it's very rare for Poulenc to make a similar mistake in French prosody. He almost never does. And of course, Illuminations is full of French prosody mistakes, as you might expect, because Britten is not French. But that he also has certain dislocations of the poem in English. Another setter would, knows your soul, O journeying boy, our rude realms far above, where the actual accentuations would link the two phrases better than actually is the case. Whence with spacious vision you mark and meet that region of sin that you find you in. And it's very important you get as much contrast, find you in, but are not of, but are not of. As if you suddenly are succumbing to the idea of the boy as a magical presence. Are not of. You are not magical or simply untouched purity, innocence. That the horrible, greasy, clackety-clack, cold, grimy third-class seat cannot touch the beauty, the innocence. The boy is far above, like an angel. It's actually a hymn to the beauty of childhood, the hymn to the innocence of childhood, and a hymn to someone who simply doesn't think it his business to go up to the child and say, hello, little fellow, are you lost? What can I do? You don't. Children are adults, particularly working class children. They work as adults. They have adults' pains. Children are little adults. In a sort of a sense, that whole element of the culture of childhood, which collectively looks after children today as an understanding of their importance to protect them, is not part, particularly with working class children, of the whole understanding of what children were. But Hardy doesn't interfere, and he doesn't help, and he doesn't try and find out if the boy's lost his mother. Instead, he allows himself to imagine the child as something of a parable. Normally, I work a lot with the pianist on terms of the clacking train, that this was good, that wasn't over-pedaled. In a sense, it's that, it's a brilliant pianistic equivalent of a train. I thought it was, apart from the middle section, which I thought got bogged down towards, freely, you see, can mean freely in a forward direction, not necessarily only in a backward direction. Sure. Towards a world unknown who calmly, as if in curious take on all at stake, breath can undertake this plunge alone. And you can't really do a diminuendo as much on alone if you're actually in the middle of a breath. Plunge on. So that's actually what that's part of. But otherwise, a very, very nice performance. And it's very clear that you like this music. Have you done the whole cycle?
I haven't, but I'd love to. I'm hoping to do it next semester, actually.
Well, Marie-Elise, I've heard you playing on a number of occasions. It's never been ever less than marvelous. And excuse me for not lavishing a lot of attention on your part, but you know, you're a colleague, not a student, and I, you know, just go on doing what you're doing as far as I'm concerned. Just bear in mind always that Britain doesn't require interpretation. It requires, like Fauré, rather than Brahms, allowing what's there to go through. And there are marvelous performances of himself playing at the piano, which we have also with Poulenc, which make all that difference. Unfortunately, we don't have Schubert playing the piano, or Schumann, or Brahms, but we do have Britten. And what a great accompanist he was. Tended to actually get too fast sometimes because he got very nervous and the heartbeat went forward, and he sometimes was precipitous. So never less than exciting. Anyway, thank you both. And I fear I must get on to the next singer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bless you. Now come to a setting of I'm sorry, I've got some technical issue here. We now come to John Donne, a poet from the 16th, early 17th century. Britain set these extraordinary, powerful poems after a visit with Yehudi Menuhin to play to the liberated prisoners of Bergen-Belsen in Germany, just after the camp had been liberated by the Allies, I think by the British, and basically the most terrible sights of humanity's inhumanity, man's inhumanity to man. The drama, the cycle is largely, not completely, but largely about death. Not the song we're going to hear today, but there's a lot about death. Death and sexual attraction and magic were two big themes in John Donne's poetry. And we're going to hear Anthony Leon and Kyung-ga Lee perform from that cycle of 7 songs and sonnets that Britten composed in 1945 in a sickbed in August, having come back from Bergen-Belsen, having a sort of shock about what he's seen and falling ill and going to hospital and writing these complex pieces of music in his hospital bed as he recovered. So can we please hear that extraordinary song, Batter My Heart?
Batter my heart, free person gone, for you as yet must not breathe shine and seek to mend. That I may rise and stand, or throw me and bend your force to break blown and make me new. I, like a news uptown to another due, labor not meet you, but reason your vice, freud me should defend. What is captive then proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain, but am betrothed to your enemy. Divorce me entire, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except enthrall me, never shall be free.
You move slightly to your right because I'm obscured. Now I can see you. If you just come a little further, if maybe I don't know, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, good, great.
You know, the bare bones of the song are marvelously done from both of you. It's an absolute etude. I can only say that so much American song requires this type of virtuosic piano writing now that accompanists who've grown up in the American song tradition find something like this relatively simple. By British song standards, it's a real etude for everybody. But what I think is extraordinary about it are what Britten understands about it by providing the sense of excitement and what he doesn't understand about it. And as such, just for the general edification, because this is one of those things where once it starts, it stops. I can't ask you to linger on anything. I can't ask you to do anything much in terms of, it's got a very fast marking, in my opinion, a little bit too fast. And again, it was typical of Britain to actually be a bull in a china shop when it came to tempo. But I want to just read a few things which have helped me in terms of my understanding of the song and the cycle in general. If you look at that, can you see that?
Yes.
That is only in the last 15 years become in the possession. It was discovered, it's John Donne, and it was acquired by the National Portrait Gallery in Britain. And you see there's an incredible suavity. I've got it the wrong way around, I beg your pardon.
There we go, yes.
He's a very, very, very dark and dangerous and sensual man.
Yes.
And long-fingered, tall. He ended up being Dean of St. Paul's and famous for his religious sermons. But he was also tormented all his life by sexual passion. Indeed, I would say that Batter My Heart, if you look at the words, is an addict song.
Yes.
It's begging for release from addiction. It wants an intervention greater from God to help him beat the addiction. And in this case, because of the words of ravish and the sexual imagery, he was famously happily married to a woman called Anne Moore, who died before he did. And there is a song, Since She Whom I Loved, which is addressed to her memory.
Yes.
But before her, and probably during her, he was sorely tempted by the flesh. And I mean, I'm just going to read something because I think this is one of the most extraordinary poems of the late 19th, the late 16th, early 17th century. And I'm not going to read it all. It's an elegy, but it's called Going to Bed, right?
All right.
Come, madam, come. All rest my powers defile, until I in labour lie. The foe oft times having the foe in sight is tired with standing, though he never fight. Your gown going off, such beauteous state reveals as when from flowery meads the hill's shadows steals. And he talks about the hat coming off and her hair. Your gown going off, such beauteous state reveals, there's that. And then, now off with shoes, and then safely tread in this love's hollowed temple, this soft bed. And then perhaps some of the most famous lines ever. License my roving hands and let them go, before, behind, between, above, below. Oh, my America, my new-found land, my kingdom safeliest when with one man manned, my mine of precious stones, my empery, how blessed am I in this discovering thee, to enter in these bonds as to be free. Then where my hand is set, my seal shall be. Full nakedness, all joys are due to thee, all souls unbodied, bodies unclothed must be, to taste whole joys. And he ends the poem. Then, since that I may know, as liberally as to a midwife, show thyself. Cast all, yea, this white linen hence, there is no penance due to innocence. To teach thee, I am naked first. Why then, what needst thou have more covering than a man? I don't think there has been poetry as passionate or as sexual as that anywhere. My America, my newfound land, roving, exploring. And remember, America was, that was the new world. That was the undiscovered territory.
Right.
There's something in the energy of that man saying that Britten finds the same energy in the song. But all that sexual license, all very well if it was his wife on her wedding day, and we're not certain it probably is, it becomes a great deal more difficult if you suddenly find yourself in the middle of an addiction, a sexual addiction, where you are saying, I need God, I need something more than you're giving me. I don't want a distant inspiration. I want you to come and take me over so that I'm strong enough to resist. Pretty helpless. And so the poem reads like this, and this is a section that I don't think, there's one section in particular that Britten doesn't do well in. Batter my heart, three-personed God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend. You see, he's saying that God has only been gentle with him, breaking, breathing, shining, and seeking to mend. I need more than seeking to mend, he's saying. I need a total makeover. That I may rise and stand, overthrow me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like an usurped town to another due, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason, your viceroy in me, should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. Now that line means reason, I should not be doing those things. It's bad for your career. It's going to be dangerous. Don't. And my viceroy God sends me reason to lose my head out of this. So reason is the subject of the sentence. Reason your viceroy and me should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. Britten sets it as if it's a command. Reason your viceroy and me.
Yes.
I mean, how it should be said is reason your viceroy and me. Not reason your vice. It sounds like you're commanding. Reason your vice.
Yes.
That's and then of course, yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. Now that is the line. I can never be chaste unless you, God, make me the victim and totally inhabit my body, driving out anything that I should not be doing. So actually, this is a very, very difficult setting because it's difficult to get that feeling of begging that something should be different than it is. But I believe if you have that thought, it's useful. I've heard a lot of performance, batter my heart, three-person guard, for as yet but knock, breathe, shine. But as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to men. And here we have an interesting example. There's the poem and there's the composer's setting. And if I criticize the poem, if I criticize the setting, I should set it again myself better. Britten has, to a certain extent, not brought out important aspects of this poem, to my mind. But what can help is to be aware in the song that you are not talking or describing something, but you're batter my heart, batter it, it deserves battering, batter my heart. You just want, I think it's unbelievable how people must feel. They want a bigger force than they have in their life. They keep on doing stupid things. They keep on doing the addiction. He keeps on being unchaste. And what he wants instead is to be ravished, as he is ending up ravishing all these women. And so it just is a tiny flavor to the song.
Yes.
And I would just say this, magnificent as Kyung, you played that really note perfectly. It was amazing. Thank you very much. The staccatos, the color, everything was wonderful. But I would take it ever so slightly, da 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 da, batter my heart, not batter my heart, three-person guard, for as you knock, breathe. I would take it down a few metronome marks so that in fact you are riding the song and it's not riding you. There are certain songs that are fast that tend to be who is the horse and who is the rider and who is ridden. I mean, that's an actual famous line from referring to Tarquinius from The Rape of Lucretia, a Britten opera. He's so full of lust. Well, you can argue that Donne is like that, but to get this that I may raise, that I may rise and stand. You see, I believe that phrase is that I may rise and stand, o'erthrow me and bend your force. And we get that I may rise and stand, that I may rise, that I may rise. And the whole of it is generally a little bit illuminated by something rather than what was that running through the song. What I'd like to do, because basically you have this at your fingertips and it's remarkable. That when we finish, I'd like you to sing it again. Just don't, I mean, you'll always sing it with more poise the second time. Somebody once said to me, don't worry about masterclasses. They'll sing it once, you'll say something, and because they're less nervous and more relaxed, they'll sing it better the second time. And the public will imagine that it's something you've said that got them better. Well, all I can say is that I can't make this, I can't change what I've criticized. Is just to make you aware that a poem as great as this, it's the type of recklessness that we see in things like Ville and Marine in the Les Illuminations, where there's a slew of wonderful French and an incredible atmosphere, but no French audience can make the hell out of what's happening because the prosody is so skew. And Britten was criticized for his prosody by Bernac and by Poulain. But that wasn't the point. The point is to make a musical impression, and that was Britten's achievement. And in certain simpler poetry like Thomas Hardy and other poems, he does that in great in great era. This is a great vocal scherzo by a hot rod pianist. Do you know that Britten told me very proudly, I asked him, he said, I got my ARCM, which is the one exam he sat was the associate of the Royal College of Music when he was 18 or 19 or 20 or something like that. And he played the Chopin B-flat minor sonata. That was his piece. He didn't go in for Mozart sonatas. He had a dashing side to his nature and to his technique. There was a side to him that relished virtuosity, but virtuosity under control. This particular piece, when he had a high fever, as he composed it, when he'd just seen this horrendous sights of bells, must be balanced with the fact of what it's about. I think I'm going to give you one thing to remember. It's a plea to God for help.
Yes.
If you can actually put that thought on top of all the reckless movement, on top of all the other things that are happening in this extraordinary piano part. By the way, extraordinary, and I hope that Kyung Lee would agree with me, that although it's difficult, it's magnificently written for the piano, so that actually when we all pianists know when somebody understands the piano and how piano's fingers work. There are some composers, like the great Michael Tippett, for example, whose piano writing isn't at all sympathetic. It doesn't actually fit under the hands in the same way, but Britten's does. So now, a few questions. Have you done any, I know you were going to offer me the other one, Since She Whom I Loved, weren't you? Have you done all the cycle?
I haven't done the whole cycle, but I have studied and prepared a few of them before, but I haven't done the whole cycle yet.
No. It's big stuff.
Yes. Yeah, it's quite the work for.
Can I say in general, never sing any song faster than you can in your brain encompass the words.
Yes.
In your brain, so that you're not just switched off and doing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, one of those things where it's automatic pilot.
Yes.
The less the song is on automatic pilot, and the more it is a plea to God, and the more that these words are persuading God. He's hoping God is saying, my God, heavens, John Donne, that's so wonderfully expressed, I may just help you.
Yes.
I mean, he's using the brilliance of his language, and it is brilliant language.
Mm-hmm.
Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, shall never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me.
Yeah.
That's so wonderful that a man would write the idea of being ravished. And the only person that a man like Donne, who was 100% ladies' man, the only way that he could ever open himself up to be ravished is by being entered by the Spirit of the Holy Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
That's very daring. It's a very daring piece of analogy.
Yes.
And always remember, it's always worth studying the poetry separately and fully, because this is one of the means. Studying the poetry separately and fully, finding out about John Donne, finding out about his feelings and his life and his tribulations and his successes and his failures. He had a terrible marriage because his father-in-law didn't want this adventurous, dangerously good-looking, voluptuous young man to marry his daughter.
Right.
And the father destroyed him in one aspect, and he had to start rebuilding his career again. The father-in-law destroyed him.
Yeah.
The thing is that singer's culture the great thing is that without having to go on a culture course, simply by finding out everything about your songs and about the literature involved with them, you have an automatically hidden culture course. By the time you're in your 40s, you know a whole lot of stuff about all sorts of literary and historical things, because this is, after all, this is a man 6 years, I think 6 years younger than Shakespeare. That's where he fits in. He's younger than Shakespeare, but not by very much. A Catholic, by the way, who had to abandon Catholicism in order to get on, and he became in the Church of England, Episcopalian, abandoned Catholicism. But the guilt, that's really Catholic. That sense of real guilt for sexual reasons. I'm going to ask you to sing it again.
Sure.
Would you mind doing that?
No, I'd love to.
I mean, with some of these thoughts flowing, I don't ever expect immediate transformations. But say the words and keep a hold on what they mean as you say them,
Yes.
without them coming out automatically. Because when you say batter my heart, 3-person God, that's a huge thing to say.
Yes. Should we?
So different from get me a Coke, it must be cold. You know, these are mighty words.
Yes, they are.
And batter my heart, 3-person. You'll find that without taking an inch away from the excitement of the scherzo, you're insisting on relishing and tasting the words as you go.
Yes.
Will give the song greater weight.
Yes.
It just needs, like all this music, greater weight. And that is the advocacy of what the singer alone is capable of. And one of Britten's great fortunes in his life is that he had someone who was intrinsically extremely eloquent with the phonation of words.
Yes.
I mean, wonderful, wonderful use of English. Peter was the last person. I mean, now, you know, he would be 111 now. But when he said, "Where are you going?" you heard the H and where. That's something that's from another age.
Right.
That sort of type of English diction.
Right. Yes.
Okay, Anthony, let's just hear it again, ever so slightly more held.
Sure.
And of course,
Should we try it, perhaps slightly slower, as you were suggesting?
yes. I mean, a small bit slower. I don't want to lose the excitement, but I want to give you the time to say 3-person God.
Sure, yes.
As soon as you do gobbledygook, I mean, you know, the one advantage in Lieder when you do gobbledygook is that it's not your language, and who knows, but this is your language. You're a fluent English speaker.
Yes, I was, native English.
Maybe you have Spanish in there as well, do you?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I was born in America, yes, but my parents are Hispanic. Yeah, my mom is.
Yeah.
My dad is
Well,
Spanish. But I was born here in America. So.
So the language is, you know.
Yes.
The language. Quickly, let's hear it.
Okay.
Come a little bit to your right, a little bit, so I can see you. That's better. Thank you.
Batter my heart, 3-person God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend. That I may rise and stand, or throw in bend your force, to break lower and make me new. In your eyes, beneath me, should be fine. Oh, sorry. Can we try it again from?
All right, Just go straight from there.
Yes.
Yeah. I like an usurped town.
Sure.
I like a usurped town to another due. Maybe 'twas meet you, but oh, to know raising your voice, roy me should defend. But this captive then proves weaker and true. Yet dear, dear love, and would be loved fain. But I'm betrothed to your enemy. Divorce me entire, breaks as not again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except enthrall me, never shall be free. Nor ever chaste except to ravish me.
Thank you, both of you. Great to work with you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's progress straight on to our next couple of singers, Angela Yam and Gayong Park. We're going to hear a setting of Benjamin Britten called Fish in the Unruffled Lakes, the earliest song from the 1930s, a setting of his great mentor, inspirer, poet friend, W.H. Auden. And this is an example of early Britain, more experimental Britain. We've heard, first of all, from the 1950s, then the 1940s, and now we're going back for the final song of the day to the 1930s. Sorry, we seem to be having a connection problem here. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm still stuck on B. I can't see anything. Pierce, I'm still got a big B on my screen. I can't see the singers.
Graham, I think they're dealing with an audio issue, and they're
right.
trying to fix it.
Oh yes, I'll just wait then. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
I've already introduced the song when you weren't hearing, so go straight into the performance of it, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll give you another chance to sing it again because the middle section didn't go quite right. But let's talk about it first. I've performed this song often enough with sopranos. It fits very well with sopranos. It was performed by the Sophie Wies, a singer of Swiss descent, who was a very important early singer of Britain before Peter Pears became in the picture. But the poem is strangely personal, and it encapsulates a certain story, a certain aspect of Britain's life, and that concerns W.H. Auden. Wystan Auden, 8 years older, incredibly talented. Well, he's one of the geniuses of poetry of the 20th century. So that the two of them, Auden and Britten, found themselves working in London in the years of the Depression in the 1930s. Britten, having just left the Royal College of Music, having to make his living, having no private family money. His father already died early. He had to go out there and make a living as a composer, one of the very few British composers who ever had to do that, because many of them had private means. Vaughan Williams and all these people, John Ireland, they all had family money. If you composed, like Armstrong Gibbs was a toothpaste millionaire, Gibbs toothpaste. There were many people who could only compose serious music as opposed to hits for the theatre or for the popular music of the time, you know. But Britten was determined to make his own living and went to work at the General Post Office unit, which was making films. And there he met a man 8 years older who was hired to write poetry to go with some of these films made by the post office. The most famous example is called Night Mail, and it's about a train going from London overnight to Scotland, picking up letters on the way, dumping letters on the way, showing all sorts of sorting in the middle of the train. The GPO that had also, there were films about miners. It was British people at work with a slight left-wing slant and working class, and Britain provided background music and Auden did texts. The poem Night Mail is one of the most marvelous poems because it's like a railway engine. Anyway, Britain suddenly finds that he's in the company of this man who's a gigantic intellect, who's extremely opinionated, who is something of a bully, who is openly and unashamedly gay, whereas Britain's attitude to his sexuality is much more repressed and, let's put it this way, from the country. Britain was something of a country mouse, as we would say. Auden, however, took Britain under his wing and decided that the two of them were going to collaborate on great projects, because Auden had the good sense to realize that Britain was a genius. He was like most, he knew nothing, he hadn't read enough, he hadn't got any background. He hadn't been to university, he hadn't read the right books. But he was excused because he was a genius. And the thing is that being in the company of Auden, Britain learnt a whole lot of stuff. He imbibed a whole lot of slightly left-wing politics, more than slightly, because Auden went off to fight in the Spanish Civil War. And it became awkwardly clear that Auden had fallen in love with Britain, not for the normal physical reasons, but for the fact that he really thought that a relationship between two men should be creative and have artistic children. That there should be, as a result of the union, something enduring created between the two. And he thought that it would be the most ideal thing in the world if he could write the poetry and Britain wrote the music. And of course, there's an entire song cycle on this island. And this was going to be the first of another set of songs, but they fell out. It was inevitable. Auden was a bully in a sense of he decided everything. He was a huge, huge personality, and Britten simply, after a while, decided he had to get out. A, there was no physical chemistry between him and Auden. B, there was an incredible sense of irritation that although Auden knew everything about philosophy, about history, about languages, about mythology, about everything you would care to name, he was weak in terms of how music actually works. In that sense, he was like Goethe, who had plenty of opinions on music, but not actual very much understanding of the physical attributes involved. So this poem is one of those collaborations until everything went wrong. Our Hunting Fathers is a big orchestral song cycle, and that sort of marks the turning point before Paul Bunyan. Now, that was the real turning point. In New York, both of them were expatriates from the war situation, and they did an opera together, Paul Bunyan, which was panned thoroughly by the New York critics, Virgil Thompson in particular. And their relationship fell apart. And Peter Pears became the important and most guiding influence in Britten's life. And Auden was sort of exiled. And then when he wrote the libretto for the Rake's Progress for the rival Stravinsky, and then he was really exiled. How does this affect us? It affects this knowledge of the poem. You have to understand the poem is an extraordinary one. I wish I could have a dialogue with you where we could talk, but I can't hear you all that well from stage, and you need microphones. So in a masterclass situation, we would be talking with each other. So please excuse me that I continue to talk in this way. On the performing front, it's a little too fast. That's better. On the performing front, the main word is unruffled. We should see the surface of the water and little glinting fish in the piano. So there's no sense of churning. Da-da-da-da-da. Fish in the unruffled lakes. And every time he writes tenuto, you ignore that. So in actical effect, it's fish in the unruffled lakes, the swarming. Wiggly line, take time over the tenuto. It's a tiny little writ. The swarming a tempo on colors. Okay. And that also act and are gone upon times a tempo toppling wave. I think there is another one. Yes. You, my swan, who have all gifts there to the swan, impulsive, just a little bit. And as it goes down, and as the bottom part of the voice is always the weaker part of the voice, just insisting that you actually sing there is going to help you to take a bit more time. Okay. You should actually keep it very, it should never sound hectic. On the other hand, it's quite tricky. Some of the breaths are quite long, and the crowded, the whole thing expresses wonder. And this is the one moment where a woman singing it doesn't make all that much sense of the text. Mind you, let's face it, we've got lots and lots of women singing Dichterliebe and Winterreise and 100 other things. So, I mean, talking about not making sense of the text is rather outdated, except in this particular case, it's got certain aspects that are actually very particularly attuned to a relationship between two men rather than between a man and a woman. Because what is being said, and this I think is extraordinary is that animals are incredibly free. They don't have things like guilt. They are not worried about time. They don't have to hurry in the devil in the clock. And animals don't sigh for folly, said or done. They don't say, oh, the lion doesn't say, I shouldn't have killed that goat. It wasn't really very nice of me to kill that goat, you know. Oh, maybe I should have left it till tomorrow, or maybe I should have got something else, but to kill that goat was very cruel. We are tormented by these guilt things, we human beings. And it's the same thing with animal coupling. Now, animal coupling is a very politically incorrect aspect of male dominating female. It's a question of the men hunting for the women, the lion chasing the lioness being in season, and also permitting, I'm not saying there's not an element of control about some of these females, they only permit certain men to mate with them. But what happens? Animals have this automatic quality. Since this poem was written, there's been a lot of research about biodiversity of sexuality in the animal kingdom. Certain swans and certain species would have actually single-sex relationships. The idea that single-sex relationships are entirely against nature has been disproved by people from Conrad Lorenz on, who talked about geese ethology. But the interesting thing is that someone proud, someone majestic, someone talented, someone who might be thought to have all the qualities of maleness, last night should add your voluntary love. Look how the voluntary goes up as it reaches an element of touching, and then the second phrase, da-dee, it goes up in an arpeggio, and then the second arpeggio is lying down and yielding. And this person decided to yield. You can do it. I have decided you can do it with me. I will override the animal kingdom or whatever is ordained by animals. Because I am a human being, I can take certain human decisions that animals don't take. That the natural world is all very well, but animals, yes, we can envy them for all sorts of things, but what they can't have is a person saying, despite everything, despite nature or the law or the church or whatever people say I should do or shouldn't do or mayn't do or must do or mustn't, I like you enough that we will do something and I will decide to yield. That's an extraordinary poem. It's an extraordinary poem, and that's what makes it difficult for a woman to say your voluntary love, because, oh, I suppose we could actually talk of it in same-sex female situations. But historically, you have to understand that that is what the wonder and amazement is about. That you, despite the fact that you have the majesty and pride and the impulsive nature, the gifts, that you should say, I want you, not any other lion in the pack. And I want to be with you, not for natural reproductive reasons, but just because I spiritually and emotionally want to be with you. And as such, the poem written in the 1930s is, I think, extraordinary. Once again, don't allow this to become, let's refer back to the actual performance. Take the time on the tenutos, don't, it's imperfectly written in many respects. This is Britten's early essays into, I mean, it's got so much genius in it, and yet there are certain things I think that don't work. What I do think works is the amazing change of key back to F sharp major right at the end, when we've actually, I think you have to, but I must bless, I must praise. You did that far too slowly for my taste. Okay. Narrow days, da da ba 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 ba. But I must bless, I must praise that you. So that narrow days rhymes with praise. If you take it and stretch it out, you don't get that rhyme. And it's that, but you must reserve the breath. I must bless, I must praise that you of all people, you, my swan, who have all gifts that to the swan impulsive, again the tenuto nature gave, the majesty and pride that can actually, you can enjoy the words majesty and pride. Then really the contrast, you almost did it, both of you, to make the real change as you are conducting the listener into the secrecy of the bedroom. Last night should add, and then this erotic violent as it goes up to the heavens and then subsides, that you should choose to give yourself to me in a way that's entirely not in the natural history books. Thank God we are human beings, that we are not animals. Thank God that we have the ability to choose to be different. And as I say, the diversity of animal sexuality is now something that's just enormously researched. Penguins and geese and all sorts of other emotional attachments, even among animals. I'd like you to do it again. Would you mind? And then, that'd be great. Once we've done it again, because this will give you a chance to get that middle section where it went wrong, I'd like to come back and wind up, because we've got the time just to hear you do it again, and I'll make further comments. So if Alison would be kind enough to block me out and bring me back so I can comment on this performance that's coming up.
Swans in open
Thank you so much. That was, there were certain things that were a lot better. The general tempo. Gaillon, you have to be careful to really follow these words and make a little bit more space. The swarming is the tenuto. You forgot about that. It really has to be in the unruffled legs, the swarming, not swarming. And you really control that entirely. Unless you give the space, Angela cannot make the requisite little rallentando. It's as simple as that. I was impressed that you could get, and the great lion walks through his innocent grove in one breath. That was good. Lion, fish, and swan. What the whole thing needs now is for you to see these pictures more vividly. So there is something that remains about both voice and piano sort of somehow going through a series of hoops. So one's got to invent this music as if you are speaking of things that are happening rather than doing a complicated exercise in coloratura and high wire piano playing. So when you go lion, fish, and swan, it's almost as if you see the lion and the fish and the swan, rather than lion, fish, and swan. One's got to actually visit what happened. Acton gone upon times again. That rallentando didn't come off. Be very careful, Gaillon, about when the singer is at the low point, you've really got to be careful with balance. Duty's conscious wrong, the devil in the clock. Most sopranos have very little sound right down there, and you're going to really keep that as soft as possible, because otherwise there'll be a balance issue. Sighs for folly said and done, twist our narrow days. Much better the translation. But I must bless, I must praise. That is exactly about the amount of rallentando that I think it should be. When you go, who have all gifts there, to the swan, impulsive. And there's another tenuto there. Impulsive is a word that you would think might require us to be faster, but it's impulsive. It's that sort of type of rubato. And then the majesty. Do you see, Gaillon, that in that there are accents, bum, 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 in the left hand, and that's to help the word majesty, blong, blong, majesty. You've got to get that, paint that a little bit more, and pride. And then the color change was really very nice. We really got a very nice color change last night, should add. But then this voluntary needs to be a little bit more plastic. Your va, there's an element of cadenza about that without a big rallentando. You can enjoy the high notes a little bit, va, and then the tenuto, da, da, and you've got the breath. It's a long breath, but I've heard that you've got the breath to actually take more time with that phrase. Your va, and then come to the F sharp. The end of voluntary with the CG, it's like yielding, da, 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 da. So move it forward in the first bit, da, 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 dee, da, da, dee, da, 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 da. Yes, yeah, I am giving myself. Voluntarily, I'm giving myself. And that comes there, voluntary love. In the end, very nice. So certain questions of balance, certain questions of seeing the fish and seeing nature and seeing these different pictures. The great lion walks, you've got to see him in your head as a picture. And the swans in the winter air, their white perfection have. The more pictures you have, and this applies to Lieder or anything or in any language, the more pictures you have about things, the less it sounds like you're just saying something like going through hoops, you can actually see the swan and you can actually see the innocent grove of the lion. And then we, the contrast, till our shadows days are done. Human beings are so much less lucky than animals. Animals are so much luckier. They just exist and they do their thing. And look at what us, we must weep and sing, and the duty's conscious wrong. Try and get a little more sound out. The devil in the clock.
Yeah, okay.
The goodness carefully worn for atonement or for luck. That's a brilliant line. And then, of course, losing your love. Animals don't mourn in the same way we do. When we have a loved one, or I mean, not dogs can mourn the loss of a master, but out in the wild, turn an envious look. And then all that, but in the end, it's all worthwhile being a human being for the simple fact that human beings are not constricted in the way that animals are, and that human beings can adorn and change and be exemplary or different, or human beings can make a choice about who they want to love. And that choice is now, it's enshrined in many constitutions, that love is a sacred thing, and whom you wish to love is a part of your own personality, your right to love whom you please. That such a poem was written in 1937 or earlier is a wonder and a measure of Auden's importance. Anyway, if you can just do those tenutos, that slower tempo a lot better. There are lovely things there. And I'm sorry I'm not there to be at the piano, to demonstrate, to show you what I mean physically, personally, and in my own. I cannot wait for a chance to come to NEC and actually meet you and physically work, because the physical presence of a teacher, I think, God bless Zoom in these terrible times, but it makes a difference. Until then, thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Graham, it is so wonderful to revel with you in this music and this poetry, and to hear you give us new pathways to love it more and to understand it more. On behalf of all of us here at NEC, I thank you for your time and all of your words today. And I hope that you will be here in Boston with us soon and in this building.
I'd love that. And many congratulations. What I always love to hear in any masterclass, and I hear it loud and clear in today's students, is a love, interest and reverence for the music and for the poetry. And it's just the knack of a lifetime's work to find out how best to ride that. It's really like riding a horse, isn't it? Rather than the horse riding you, that you are actually not in some type of rodeo where the song is going to throw you, but you're actually going to stay saddled with the music and be in control of your material. That's all that this is about.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I hope you have a good evening. I see the sun setting in your window.
It is. You can actually see a sense of late afternoon. We'll have a good lunch and we'll be in touch, I hope. Bless you.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.